introduce I'll introduce both of the novelists first at the same time, and then they'll take the stage together. Okay, first we have, tell me how to say it. Ginder. Thank you, Grant. First, we have Grant Ginder. He's the author of novels Let's Not Do That Again, Honestly, We Meant Well, The People We Hate at the Wedding, Driver's Education, and This Is How It Starts. Originally from Southern California, he studied at the University of Pennsylvania and received his MFA from NYU, where he currently teaches writing. He lives in Brooklyn with his husband, Mac, and their disastrous dog, Frankie. So Grant's books, his most recent book was named one of the 20 most anticipated books of 2022 by Entertainment Weekly. Today's best beach read of all time, one of the Washington Post's 13 feel-good books to brighten your summer, Electric Lit's most anticipated LGBTQ plus books of 2022, and one of women.com's LGBTQ must read for Pride Month. In the review by the New York Times of Let's Not Do That Again, they state, nominally about politics, the novel is a skittering satire about a fissured nuclear family that could be transposed to almost any other industry. A caper populated by urban elites. I can't think of anyone in recent years who has lampooned that cohort so freshly and efficiently as Ginder. In a world increasingly starved for good dialogue, his is bountiful and crackling, like the screwball comedies of yore. Jonathan Vatner is one of the beloved Hudson Valley Writers Center teachers. He teaches our popular Year of Your Book fiction class. He is the author of The Bridesmaids Union, which just became available on June 14th from St. Martin's Press. His 2019 novel, Carnegie Hill, earned praise from People, Town & Country, the New York Post, and the LA Review of Books. He is the managing editor of Hue, the magazine of Fashion Institute of Technology. He teaches fiction writing at NYU and the Hudson Valley Writers Center. He lives in Yonkers, New York with his husband and his cats. The Bridesmaids Union was included in Book Culture's most anticipated book of 2022, Book Riot's What to Read Summer 2022, and the Ethel's Must Read of the Summer. In his wonderful piece on the background of writing The Bridesmaids Union in yesterday's Electric Lit, Jonathan Vatner writes, I'd like to think it's because as a novelist, I look out at the far reaches of human behavior, the wildest possibilities for interpersonal drama. That's what novels can do, push characters to the extreme so that readers can feel the consequences of risky decisions without ruining their own lives. I'm naturally shy and conflict averse, but rubbernecking at others' train wrecks, I learn how to live in the world. That's good advice, Jonathan. Lucky for us, when Jonathan's editors at St. Martin's Press asked him to write about the underbelly of late-stage capitalist weddings, he agreed to meticulously research that culture and write this hilarious and moving satire about it. Thank you so much, and welcome to The Novelist today. We're so excited to have you here.
I can take this off to read. Yes. Okay, great. So I think what we're gonna do is I'm gonna read a bit from mine. We'll chat. Jonathan's gonna read a bit from the Bridesmaids Union, and then we'll chat and we'll open it up to questions. Okay. So just to give you a little bit about the book before I get into the section that I'm gonna read, it follows the last few weeks of a New York congresswoman named Nancy Harrison, who is running for Senate, the last few weeks of her campaign, which is becoming increasingly chaotic, and becomes even more so when a video goes viral of her wayward daughter throwing a champagne bottle through the window of a beloved Parisian bistro during this huge French protest. So Nancy, and at the last ditch effort to save her campaign, sends her long-suffering son to retrieve Greta, her daughter, and bring her home. The son, Nick, used to work for Nancy as kind of her fixer and her speechwriter, but has recently gotten out from under her thumb and is now teaching writing at NYU, which perhaps not coincidentally is what I do. And he's a really big musical theater buff. And so he's also working on kind of his passion project, which is a musical based on the early years of Joan Didion. And the title of the musical is Hello to All That. So the section that I'm going to read is Nick's inspiration for Hello to All That. Okay. So here it goes. It was an idea that came to him last fall when in his Introduction to Thinking course, he asked his students to read On Self-Respect, the essay that Didion published in Vogue in 1961, the one that, as he explained it to them, really put her on the map. He remembers how in the minutes before class started, he rolled up his shirt sleeves and smelled the fresh ink on the stack of copies he'd Xeroxed. It was his first day on the job, his first day of life free from the incessant demands of Washington, the country, and his mother, and he was excited. Excited to see minds bloom, to help them untangle the mysteries of the world, to learn. As the clock crept closer to 9 o'clock, he polished his glasses and checked his teeth. He sat in his chair and then, thinking better of it, leaned on the edge of his desk instead. One by one, the students filed in, unloading their backpacks and taking seats around the seminar table. How young they looked and how eager. He greeted each of them with a hearty hello, and when they asked him if he was Professor Harrison, he laughed and waved the question away. Professor Harrison was someone who wore tweed jackets and said things like, indubitably, they could call him Nick. He didn't bother with the syllabus, the tedious parsing of due dates and attendance policies, the arithmetic of final grades. Instead, he hit them with a bang. He hit them with the Didion. For the first minute, they approached the text timidly, a group of swimmers using their toes to test the temperature of the lake. And then slowly they began to wade in. So let's start with the big question, he said, once the last student had finished the essay. What is self-respect? At first, crickets, the soft creak of weight being redistributed in chairs. And then bingo, a hand. The girl across the table, who by now had tucked her pencil into a loose bun of raven hair, a freshman whose name a quick glance at Nick's roll sheet revealed was Vanessa. Yes, he clasped his hands together and pointed at her. Take it away. Yeah, I actually find this essay to be really problematic. The class stared at Nick. Nick bit his lip. Oh, huh. So if you check out the fifth to last paragraph, for example, a flurry of turning pages, raindrops alighting on flat-faced leaves. She says, people who respect themselves are willing to accept the risk that the Indians will be hostile. Well, right. Okay, well, first of all, it's Native Americans. Okay, that's a fair point. And second of all, hostile from whose perspective? A bunch of smallpox-infested white guys who've come to steal their land? Oh, well, I think she was using that as a callback to the paragraph before, where she quotes from the diary of a young pioneer girl. Okay, so the daughter of a smallpox-infested white guy who has come to steal their land. Nick scratched his head. It was 1961, he offered, meaning that maybe they didn't have the same perspective on that word yet, or the same perspective on the brutalities of manifest destiny, evidently, because I hardly think that being a foot soldier in the mass genocide of Native peoples calls for a celebration of self-respect, even if you, Vanessa scanned the page, narrowed in on a quote, have the courage of your own mistakes. Someone coughed. Outside, a garbage man collected bags on West 11th Street, hurling them into the rear of a truck. Okay, Nick said. So let's acknowledge that the use of Indians in this paragraph is, as Vanessa said, problematic. Beyond that, though, what is Didion really saying here? What does she mean when she says that we flatter ourselves by thinking this compulsion to please others an attractive trait, a gift for an imaginative empathy, evidence of our willingness to give? What is this compulsion to please? Why does this compulsion to please stand in opposition to self-respect? Vanessa's hand shot up, but Nick pretended he didn't see it. Instead, he directed his attention to her right, where a boy with a nose ring was drawing circles in the margins of his paper. Amir, he said, what do you think about this whole idea of a compulsion to please? Setting his pen down, Amir glanced at Vanessa and then at the rest of the class. He seemed nervous, skittish. His glasses slipped and he reached up to straighten them. You said this was published in Vogue? Yeah, that's right, in 1961. Oh, yeah. Amir blushed. I guess I just find that a little weird. Vanessa nodded vigorously. Nick scratched his neck. Why is that? Well, Vogue is a fashion magazine, right? Well, yes, primarily, but they've also published some of the best. And isn't a fashion magazine mostly concerned with telling women, well, white women really, how to make themselves appear pleasing to others? Like, isn't that basically why fashion magazines exist? I think that the people who work at fashion magazines might find that debatable. Amir reached up and twisted his nose ring. I guess all I'm saying is that it seems a little hypocritical to be writing about self-respect for a magazine that I imagine makes a lot of women question their worth. That's all. And so on and so forth and etc. For the next hour and 15 minutes, they discussed the essay's troubling allusions to Jordan Baker and its misguided admiration of Chinese Gordon in Khartoum. They discussed the name Chinese Gordon. They discussed the intellectual privilege of Phi Beta Kappa and the shaming of Kathy in Wuthering Heights, and the essay's presumptuous and all-encompassing use of we. They discussed Julian English and the appointment in Samara and the 19th century and paper food fare bags. They never, not even once, discussed self-respect. This was invigorating, the energy of young minds, but also disappointing. Nick's lesson plan for the next 3 classes depended upon their reaching at least a vague consensus of what the essay meant. Beyond that, he was curious, and genuinely so. What was self-respect? And a sub-question, how does a person know that he has it? Joan said that it was about taking one's own measure and making one's own peace. Had Nick done that when he struck out on his own? Had Joan? Is that what she felt when she graduated from Berkeley? Or how about when she won the Prix de Paris and moved to New York? He often imagined her boarding that plane, her ticket clutched with both hands, her heart going haywire in her chest. He imagined her walking into Vogue and getting homesick for the dry Sacramento summers and writing Run River and meeting John Gregory Dunn. He imagined her falling in love. And as Nick did so, as he relived those memories that were never really his, something else materialized for him. A rainbow suddenly appearing across a swath of rain-scrubbed sky, an arc, the story of a life, a musical. Joan singing a lament for California, Joan belting in the heart of Herald Square. He didn't know any composers, at least not directly, but this was New York, the land of waiters with Juilliard degrees, the mecca of frustrating, underworked talent. After talking to 2 friends and sending 3 emails, he'd connected with Celeste, a jazz pianist from the Peabody Institute who had abandoned a life of gigs to write jingles for car commercials. They met at a pub near Union Square, a happy hour spot with big square windows through which Nick could see snow gathering on the hoods of cars. He wore a button down and jeans, Celeste dressed in all black. She remained perfectly still as he explained the project, moving only to take slow, long sips of her Syrah. Around them, the bar began to fill, wool slacks and iron shirts, black coats hanging from the backs of chairs. Joan Didion, she said. Yeah, that's right. Like slouching toward Bethlehem, Joan Didion. Yeah, that's the one. You know, slouching was my original title. Celeste ran a finger around the rim of her glass. Yeah, she said, I don't think so. What do you mean? I mean, it's not for me. Nick took a sip of beer and licked the foam from his lips. This was an outcome for which he had not prepared. Well, we could workshop it, of course, he said, share a creative vision and all that. We could listen. Celeste raised a hand to stop him. I don't think it's the most compelling subject matter. No offense. Nick looked down. Snow melted on the tips of his shoes. There was literally a musical called Chess, he said. Thanks. What's that? Yeah, sure. Sure. Yeah.
That was one of my favorite parts. Thank you for reading that.
Sure.
The Joan Didion thing. The musical just makes me crack up even now. I guess this leads me to a couple questions. One is, how do you make it so funny? Like, how do you do this humor that like has me like laughing out loud constantly as I'm reading?
Oh gosh. Well, I'm flattered that you think it's funny. Some Goodreads reviewers don't. I'm just kidding. I don't read my Goodreads reviews. Of course I do. I don't know. I think that I have to amuse myself, right? I mean, like, as you know, writing a novel is a grueling, tedious, hellacious process that often lasts like 3 to 4 years. And so I think I have to find ways to amuse myself. And so in part of that is making myself laugh. And so like a Joan Didion musical, it's like, like what? Like that would never fucking happen. I'm sorry. That would never happen. Right. Or I don't know, maybe it would. I mean, there are weirder musicals out there. Right. So like, that's an example of that. Right. I was like, oh, well, if this is going to be this sort of like B or C storyline that this guy is writing on this musical, it has to be something funny. It has to be something that I want to imagine and write about. And so I think I mine humor in that way. I don't know. Yeah.
And then my other question is about Nick. Like, clearly there's some similarities with your life. But like, I always hate this question when people ask it to me, but like, I couldn't help wondering, like, how did you mix you and this other character? And like, what's the process of putting yourself on the page in that way to the extent that you did?
Sure. So that's a great question. I think Nick on paper is very much me, but is not sort of emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, whatever, me, right? And so what I mean by that is my job, I've been teaching at NYU now for 10 years, and I love my job, but I also find it to be a hilarious job, right? I mean, like being surrounded by 18-year-olds all day long is hilarious. They are functionally children. They like have no idea that the things that they're saying are so crazy and that the things that they're writing are so crazy. And so like, I wanted to mine that, but I love them. You know what I mean? Like I have such compassion for them, and it's so inspiring to be around them, particularly because a lot of these people are like in New York for the first time, and they're so excited. And so being able to mine that was I'd never done before, and so I wanted an opportunity to do that, which is why I gave Nick this particular job. I was also a speechwriter in Washington before I started writing fiction. Right after I graduated from undergrad, I worked for John Podesta at the Center for American Progress, and actually speechwriting I think taught me a lot about. This is going to sound weird, but taught me a lot about fiction writing. Sorry, John. But it's so I was able to mine that as well with Nick, right? And so yes, on paper it's like, oh wow, Grant's resume and this fictional person that Grant made up, their resumes are very similar. But I really didn't have to tap into any of my sort of own emotional stuff. Well, I mean, Nick has a complicated relationship with his mother, which like, so I mean that I guess is similar. But it's interesting because I'm a project. This is straying a little bit from the question, but a project that I'm working on now, the narrator of that book is very much based on me when I was a teenager. And I'm finding that to be incredibly difficult to actually tap into. The more sort of emotional notes of a character is very difficult, much more difficult than tapping into sort of the surface level stuff of what he does for work, right? Or how he would respond to a certain situation.
Yeah, I'm like afraid to write about myself. I like don't go near myself.
It's really hard. Like it's crazy how hard it is.
But like I feel like everything I write like has the emotional truth of something I feel or believe.
Yeah.
But like I'm not in there.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
Nope. Maybe someday. Maybe someday.
Well, I thought this book I'm writing right now, I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna write it in like 3 months. I know everything about this, right? But no, it's so hard. It's so hard.
So that actually brings me to my next question. Why did you decide to write about politics, and how did you do the research?
Oh, really good question. So the idea for the book, I think the book is nominally about politics. I think at its heart, it's really about this family and how this family navigates a personal crisis, or like a crisis within the family, but also kind of global political, a crisis moment that we're all living in. When I was coming up with the idea for the book, I was like reading Henry James's book, The Ambassadors, and that premise of this is not like it's certainly not The Ambassadors, but like the premise of a wayward American in Europe, someone having to go, being dispatched to bring them home, was something that I wanted to play with. It's by now this sort of like almost like American mythology, right? Where that storyline was used in The Talented Mr. Ripley. We see it used a lot in fiction, and I wanted to play with it. And so I thought, okay, how do I make this I make this resonant with this particular moment that we're living through? And I was like, oh, well, to make it resonant, the mother should be this politician and the daughter should fall in love with a fascist. Like that, it should be what pulls her to Europe, right? So let's play with the political tensions that we're seeing right now. As I said to you before we started, I think you actually kind of address those tensions in a much more head-on way, in a much more courageous way than I perhaps do in my book. I'm always like oblique about it, but
the Goodreads reviewers hated that.
Well, they wouldn't know a good book if it anyway. But so the inspiration kind of came from those two areas of kind of this Henry James-esque structure with this political moment. And I figured that the political moment was a way to modernize and make contemporary that kind of classic arc of someone going and someone having to bring them back.
Cool. So the other thing is, like, I've read a couple of your books now and loved them all, but this one, I really couldn't stop reading. It has the shape, like it starts as a comedy, but it has the shape of a thriller. Like there's all these like plot twists and cliffhangers and like life and death situations. How did you make me want to keep going? I'm sort of like some of my students have come and are on the Zoom too, and I appreciate that. And so I'm sort of interested in like the writing aspect for me and for them.
Sure. So I'm very flattered by that. I'm glad that you wanted to keep reading it. Obviously it's very complimentary. I did want to play with genre in a way that I hadn't done in my previous novels. And sort of mystery and thriller were two of the genres that I wanted to play with. I wanted it to have a feel. Did anyone see like Knives Out? Right, like that kind of feel where it was the genre was sort of bordering and flirting with a bunch of different things. Also, while I was writing the book, I like went through this really intense Agatha Christie phase. I had like never really read a lot of Agatha Christie before, but like it was at the very beginning of the pandemic and I was just like trying to take my mind off of everything. And so I was reading a lot of Agatha Christie. And what I realized when I was reading Agatha Christie was the pleasure that I was getting from those books was a different kind of pleasure than I was getting when I was reading, like the standard literary fiction that I typically read, which was seeing in an Agatha Christie book, the real joy, the real fun of it is seeing how something inconsequential suddenly becomes consequential and having those sort of realizations move the plot point forward, right? And so when I set out to write this, I was like, okay, I'm going to try that. I'm going to kind of plant these things very early on and throughout the book, and then allow them, these inconsequential details, to have outside consequences later on. And so I think that helped to create this sense of propulsion, right? There's like very much also a sense of like the Chekhov's gun principle in this book. If people are aware of that, if Chekhov's rule of, and I'm not like an evangelist for this rule, I think it's like perfectly fine to have a rifle hanging above the mantle that never goes off. But Chekhov's rule is if you have a rifle hanging above the mantle in the first chapter, it better go off by the second or the third. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to set up these challenges for myself and I'm going to play with these rules of plot to try to create this feeling.
And then did you plan out the whole book before you wrote it? Because it's so intricate, but like on the other hand, it feels so natural.
I did. Obviously that plan, as the best plans do, kind of like goes to waste as you start writing it. But I did plot this out much more than previous books. The book is much more reliant on plot than previous novels of mine, which tend to be more character studies. And this one, though, is very much plot driven. And that was deliberate. But I think because I wasn't necessarily comfortable working in that space, it took a lot of outlining. And because of this whole like Chekhovian idea of the gun and like, okay, well, when is the gun going to go off? And then when is this detail going to come to fruition, right? Like when I first started writing this, the book has 5 sections, 5 acts. And in the first act, I was just like putting in random details that like, I was like, I have no idea what this is going to be, but like I'm going to make myself come back to it at some point. This thing has to be important at some point. And I have no idea how. but which was a fun challenge for myself. But yeah, there was a ton of outlining going on.
And then the other thing I wanted to ask about craft is it's in the third person, except for this one part in the first person. And why did you decide to do that?
Sure. So like I said, the book has 5 parts. The second part is entirely from Greta's point of view. And Greta is the daughter, the sort of like wayward, enfant terrible daughter that's thrown the champagne bottle through the bistro window. And when I initially wrote that, I knew that the second section was only going to focus on Greta and wasn't going to focus on any other characters. But when I set out to write it, I didn't think it was going to be in the first person. But what I found was Greta makes so many sort of repugnant decisions over the course of, I think she redeems herself, but she, over the course of the novel, makes before that point, a lot of repugnant decisions. And the third person, even if it was very close third, wasn't allowing me to kind of get into her head enough and empathize with her enough. There was still that authorial distance between me and the character where there was too much judgment coming down on her. And I really need the reader to at least understand her so that when she does hopefully redeem herself, they're on board. And so the first person, eventually, I was like, this has to be in first person. And then when I made that decision, it clicked.
Did you read Purity by Franzen?
I did.
Because he does that for that exact same reason.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's so interesting how someone becomes radicalized. I mean, Greta, the book opens, she throws the bottle through the window, and like you see the whole process, and it comes from like a very personal family issue, which I think is just brilliant, and like it's something that I'm also interested in like I'm working on now, actually.
Yeah, that was probably the most research that I did for the novel. Like research heavy component was into radicalization. And there's an incredible book, a terrifying book that will make you never want to go on the internet again, called Antisocial by the New Yorker writer Andrew Marantz. It's incredible, very well researched, and really gets into the processes of radicalization, particularly on the internet. And a major takeaway that I got when I was reading the book was that people that are radicalized are often incredibly lonely, incredibly isolated, and have been sort of detached from their community in some way. And they, by the radicalizer, are offered some sort of promise of love, acceptance, and community from whatever, abhorrent ideology that they need to believe in for that. And so for Greta, it was really important to show that she has been sort of expelled from her family in this way, so she would be susceptible to that kind of radicalization.
Last question. I have some more, but maybe I'll save them for later.
But
last question is, how do you come up with titles? Because I was reading the New York Times review, and like it opened with like, what great titles. There's such great titles. What's your secret?
So they come from different places. This one actually came late once I was done with the book. I was calling it something else, and then I was on the phone with my editor, and I was talking to him sort of through the end of the book, and I was like, I just imagine like this family looking at each other and being like, oh my God, let's not do that again. And my editor was like, there you go, there's your title, done, we're done. But then People We Hated at the Wedding was someone actually asked me coming back from a wedding who I hated at the wedding. And I was like, oh, that would be a good book. And so then I started writing it. But so they come from different places, and sometimes they come really easily, and sometimes they're not easy. This one certainly was not easy, but it just kind of like came. But yeah, they come from all different places.
Oh.
So
it's excellent. And I think everyone, you should all read it. It's really, really compelling.
Thank you. Now, the main event. Yes.
We're equal billing. So the Bridesmaids Union, it came out about a month ago. And it's a book about an online support group for bridesmaids. Iris, the protagonist, has just been like a maid of honor and a bridesmaid in so many weddings. She's thousands of dollars in debt. She has like a maxed credit card that she just can't even, like, it's just in a drawer. And she's just completely drained by all the bridesmaiding. And that is a verb, right?
You just made it.
And she also she was gonna get married, and then she had kind of a runaway groom situation, and she was left with a young son. And so she's also very lonely, and she turns to the internet to find support. And she realizes that there's a lot of women out there and some men who are just like totally worn down by this sort of thankless work. And she develops this secret Facebook group that has like a pretty big following of people just kind of like complaining or like asking for support for like the weddings they're in. Her sister Jasmine then decides to get married to this guy she's been dating for like a year or maybe a little less, and Iris becomes maid of honor. So she's building this bridesmaids union, the support group, as she's like experiencing her very spoiled influencer sister, and trying to like just like soldier on. So I'm going to read this section that happens at family Thanksgiving. I think like so much great comedy and drama happens, family meals, especially at holidays. And that's not the chapter. And I just have to find it. But basically all you have to know is their older sister is Rose, the younger sister is Jasmine. Their parents are Spike and Connie. Jasmine's fiance is named David. And coming. Sorry. Here it is. Okay. When Rose arrived at Iris's building to drive her and Mason to Tenafly for Thanksgiving, Iris was taken aback, not for the first time, by her older sister's rejection of conventional beauty. She wore no makeup, had an igloo-shaped haircut, and seemed to have plumped further since the previous year. She clearly gave zero fucks about this. Head to toe stretched jersey draped over her curves like priestess clothes for a modernist cult. Her boxy driving sunglasses were for people recovering from cataract surgery. She wore spotless white orthopedic sneakers. Iris couldn't imagine her in heels. Auntie Rose, Mason squealed, dashing in for a hug as she got out of her rental car. Oh, Mason is Iris's son. How have you been, Mason? Rose asked. Iris found it amusing that she addressed him like an adult, as if a 5-year-old could integrate the near and distant past and summarize it on command. They drove south on the Sawmill, a highway so curvy it seemed to have been designed as a prank. Rose set the cruise control to the speed limit and stayed in the right lane, cars whizzing by on the left. How was the flight? Iris asked. Can't complain, Rose replied. Never give up your right to complain. Rose smiled dully. Did you fly business class? Iris asked. First, they didn't have business. Without a child or a New York apartment, Rose had money to blow on frills. She hired a team of maids to clean her home, ordered bottled water at restaurants, and flew business class, generally not first class, as her goal was comfort, not luxury. And she'd probably paid $150 a day for the rental car, a Camry. After high school, Rose had gone to the University of Florida and remained in the state for the 11 years since, in Cape Canaveral, where, as far as Iris could tell, she designed satellites for the government to spy on the rest of the world. She had always kept distance from their family, harboring a quiet wisdom she protected from her sisters. She shared neither Iris's frustration with their parents nor Jasmine's adulation. Instead, she acted like a niece, and their parents reciprocated her coolness. Sadly, Rose's detachment from the family extended to Iris. "Are you excited to see the parental units?" she asked Rose, hoping for snark. Rose shrugged. "Sure." "Now that Jasmine's getting married, Mom literally cannot stop trying to marry me off. I think there's something wrong with her brain. She's very traditional." "How's your job?" Iris asked. "Any cool projects you're working on?" "I'm not sure I can explain it." "Try me." Desperation tugged at Iris's belly. She could deal with silence, but silence with her sister was unbearable. It meant that despite growing up together and sharing half their DNA, they were strangers. "We're developing smaller and smaller satellites. So one challenge is how to control them and communicate with them when they're too small to contain most traditional aerospace components. We're creating nanocomponents that can work together to achieve complex tasks the way neurons do in the human brain." "Cool." Iris basically understood, but she didn't know what question would prove this to Rose. She also knew she would retain none of it and repeat the conversation the next time Rose came to town. "Are they going to be used to spy on other countries?" "They could be used for a variety of applications." The traffic was condensing as they climbed onto the bridge. For young Iris, the George Washington Bridge had been a portal to the miraculous metropolis, and now it represented the ignominious journey home. On the Hudson, a tugboat pushed a trash barge, leaving moire ripples in its wake. "I love the Camry," Rose said, startling Iris. "It's a good car," Iris said. It was either this or a Nissan Altima. Sorry, which is also a good car. Rose kept her eyes on the road. But the Camry. The Camry has a better safety record. I can't. Just giddy here. I don't know. The Altima is good too, Iris repeated lamely. The Haggerty family performed a codex of Thanksgiving rituals that an outsider like David could not have understood. They ate at 3 p.m. sharp. If Connie was a minute late in getting the food on the table, Spike pretended she was delaying them out of spite. He carved the turkey with the electric knife and trumpeted its features as if hosting an infomercial. Connie hoped aloud that there were no complaints about the thickness of the gravy. Jasmine had opined that it was too thin when she was 9. Spike led the family in a bit about being sleepy because they'd eaten a turkey with extra tryptophan. "The guy at Whole Foods assured us that this was a low tryptophan bird. He lied to us. I demand a refund." When Iris was feeling confrontational, she remarked at how few dishes did not contain meat. And her father would say something like, "God created animals to nourish us." There was never a break in conversation, yet no feelings were acknowledged. Iris used to cry soundlessly during Thanksgiving dinner without knowing why. This year, they had a topic at least. Jasmine was infusing the wedding with wow moments because the original plan wasn't feeling worthy of their love. She was keeping the Princeton String Quartet for the ceremony and adding a 10-piece pop band, alternating with a rock gospel trio for the reception. She would be partnering with a moonshine distillery and a nearby strawberry farm to create a signature punch she was calling Country Nectar. A local goat herd would set up a table of artisanal chev. David and Jasmine would ride to and from the ceremony on horses, and a pair of alpacas dressed as bride and groom would be available for photo ops. Spherical flower arrangements would hang from the rafters, and 3 tons of hay bales would provide lounge seating. Guests would leave with a bottle of moonshine and a monogrammed cowboy hat. Oh, and she was adding more bridesmaids to improve the photos. Iris couldn't help thinking these wow moments were connected to Jasmine's panic at the bridal salon. She'd considered pulling her sister aside to help warm her cold feet, but with Jasmine, it seemed better not to say anything than to be wrong. Anyway, Jasmine had been busy analyzing wedding spreadsheets all day. We're thinking we can do it for about 200 thou, Jasmine said, but you can't put a price on memories. I'd be happy to pitch in, David said. Please, Spike, holding out a warning hand. The custom is for the bride's parents to pay. As long as it makes our Jasmine happy, we're happy. So you won't have a ring bearer, or? Iris asked, still upset that Mason wasn't invited. That's the best part, Jasmine said. Apparently there's this trained, what's the term? Kid, David said with a smile. Yeah, a kid who comes in with a basket of rings in his mouth. Iris didn't understand. Why would a child need to be trained to bring in the rings? And why would he carry them in his mouth? And why couldn't Mason do it? Mason came to the rescue. I'm a kid. Not a boy, Jasmine said. A kid, a baby goat. Iris gulped. You're having a goat bring in the rings? It's so adorable you won't believe it. It's like a cat video times 100. It is cute, David admitted with a snorty laugh. Human children are also cute, Iris said. But everyone's done real children before, Jasmine said. Goats are fresh. Goats are sexy, Iris deadpanned. Bingo, said Jasmine, tapping her nose and pointing at Iris. It's going to go viral. Are you getting married by a chicken? David laughed again. It pleased Iris to observe that he was not a fan of Wedding 2.0, but she felt guilty about allying with him against her sister. No, Dad's officiating, Jasmine said, but the venue has a coop with heritage chickens, I think. Or maybe heritage chicken is on the menu. Iris glanced at Rose, hoping for some shared exasperation, but Rose wasn't paying attention. Her mind was probably up in space, communicating with her tiny satellites.
I have so many questions. I wrote them all down. I forgot my thing. Wait, first of all, why are cameras so funny? It was so funny.
I wrote that and I considered taking it up for so long, but it made me laugh every single time. I think it's because it's so mundane.
It's so mundane. But now, every time I see a camera, I'm gonna think of that. The Ultima's good too. Yeah, they're good cars.
It is a good car, and it's actually nicer than people think. It's more expensive.
Great.
It's not a cheap car.
No, I often find that when you get an Uber, they're like Camrys or they're all, and you get in, you're like, this is a nice car, right? And a better safety rating than the Ultima. Who knew?
I looked that one up.
Who knew? I was like, you Googled that. Okay, so I feel like this is, people ask this question, it's a cliche question, but I actually feel like it's, for this book in particular, is an interesting one, which is, where did the inspiration for this come from?
So as Jennifer sort of hinted, it actually came from my editors of Carnegie Hill. They were like, they called me in for a meeting and they were like, we want you to write about the online trend of wedding shamers. And I was like, I didn't know that this was how novels worked. And so there was this big viral story about this woman who charged $1,500 a person for people to come to her wedding. And then she just got smeared all over social media. And so the idea was how kind of, as someone said, late stage capitalism weddings have interacted with the hellscape that is social media. And I wanted to make it my own book. I didn't want to just write something that didn't interest me. So I was very interested in internet privacy, also the hellscape that is social media. And then like I definitely read that story before they told me about it. I read all the wedding, like all the bridesmaid wedding disaster stories. I just love that stuff. I eat it up. So I kind of like mixed it all together, and here we are.
And you made a great book.
Thank you.
And it certainly feels like your own. God, now I have to, like, I wish my editor would call me in and be like, write about this. Right? Instead, he just calls me. He's like, "What are you writing about?" I'm glad that you read the section that you read, because the alpaca dressed up this writing room like had me like crying my eyes out. I thought it was so funny, as did the kid moment. What is the craziest thing you have ever seen, either at a wedding or like someone do at a wedding?
Okay, so I should first say that like all those details actually happen. Like they're not, I didn't make any of it up. Like all that stuff is, I mean, it probably doesn't happen in the same wedding, but it is like people really get creative. In terms of like what I've seen, I feel like I've definitely seen like a lot of like drunk and puking people. I wish I could go to a wedding where like they call off the wedding and like they, the groom runs away with the, whatever, the event planner. But I think the sort of craziest thing, I won't name the wedding, but when like I was listening to the vows and I was like, oh, this is a crazy marriage. Like when you know that they don't really love each other, that I'm sorry that I enjoy that, but I enjoy that. Like they're in for it. Like the bride was like, I love that you get me. I love how you understand how great I am. Like you, like I will always promise to be my great self, and I love that you are going to worship me for that. And actually, like I wrote a version of that for the original in the book, and then I was like, it's too like the first draft of the book was like a cartoon because I didn't like tone down some of the stuff, but.
But I was writing that question. I was like, what's the craziest thing I've ever seen? I went to a wedding once where I was actually in the wedding. Hope this person's not watching. It was a lovely, lovely wedding. But the person, one of the people getting married, owned horses and wanted the horses to be part of the wedding. And so they constructed a ring of like horse stalls to be sort of behind the bride and groom, like as they were getting married. So the horses were like looking at the audience, but like obviously like the horses don't know that a wedding is happening. And so the horses were just like taking shit. And like, I mean, it was just like, it was not as romantic, I think, as they thought it was going to be. So I'm glad that you mentioned the internet privacy thing and sort of the hellscape of social media, because Iris, both over the course of the book, both finds herself and loses herself on the internet, and particularly on social media, and Reddit and Facebook and stuff. So how did you balance that? I imagine, just kind of getting to a craft question, when you were creating her character, that must have been a very kind of difficult tightrope to walk, right? How did you balance that dynamic while you were creating that character?
So one lesson that I like have taken to heart was something that Joan Silber taught in my first class at Sarah Lawrence in grad school, which is a novel should be anti-ideological. So like she kind of said, like, not all the arrows should point in the same direction. And I always think about that whenever I'm writing anything. Like, I'm not making a point. I'm not like, I don't have an agenda. I'm not trying to like, but but so I was sort of interested in the ways that like the internet does like console people, like lonely people. Like it is a way to connect with people. It just also is this extremely dangerous place where like one wrong move and like your life is basically over. And, without giving too much away, like Iris like has consequences for what she's doing on the internet. And I think I think I wanted her to get some joy out of it. Like I may have fallen, someone told me that like it was really hard to read the last third because it's so intense, but I wanted her to get joy out of it and for the reader to believe that she would keep doing it and that like it was like giving her like all this positive reinforcement. But then at the same time, I've just seen what happens. I like read a lot of interviews with people who had been canceled and like essays and just like the really terrible things that happen. I just didn't want to sugarcoat that.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of a follow-up to that question, but you do a really wonderful job of exposing. I think I was telling Jonathan this before our conversation started today, that I think that writing about the internet is in fact very difficult, because I think that a lot of it's become cliche. And I find it often weirdly boring, like writing about the internet, because I'm like, yeah, we all know, right? but you get to these like very, very specific dark ways that the internet has affected our lives. And particularly one of them is how it tricks us into thinking that our online communities are adequate replacements for our real life communities. So can you talk a little bit more, without giving too much away, about that sort of that rabbit hole that Iris falls into?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like, I think you can get a very particular kind of validation on the internet. And it's very, like, there's just a limit. And I think there's like a particular style that everyone has to use. And I think everyone can relate to this. Like you spend a bunch of time online and then you come away feeling sort of hollow because it's like you're just getting like the very surface of everything and you're only seeing that too. So like you sort of feel bad about yourself and then you sort of like you sort of feel like you sort of know a whole bunch of people and you like just it's just like this kind of it's a very unsatisfying experience, but it's also like it is, you know, it's something. So what was the second part of the question?
How does this play out without giving anything away for Iris?
So so she like makes this sort of close friend that she meets through the bridesmaids union, and they have like a really deep relationship, like deeper than what you get like on social media. But like there's still something missing when you're not seeing the person, and she doesn't. For most of the book, she's never met this person in person, which like relates to like I know I have close friends that I've never that I've either never met or just met a couple times just because of the internet. And I think that is a problem. I think it's a problem not to be there face to face at all, because there's just some lack of empathy. There's a disconnect, and it really is, I think, dangerous. Yeah.
Well, I mentioned this when I was talking about Let's Not Do That Again, but you do a really wonderful job of capturing fraught political dynamics within a particular family. When you started writing this book, was that intentional to kind of address Trump and how the 2016 election sort of fractured this family? Or was that something over the course, I'm assuming you wrote this book during Trump's presidency, did it feel just more and more urgent and something that you could not ignore as you were writing the book?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people were like traumatized by what happened with Trump's election and presidency, and I definitely had to process that in some way. And so yeah, I wrote it, I put it in the book. I started the book in 2018, so like a lot of the terrible stuff had already sort of come out. But then the other thing is a lot of my family voted for him, like a lot. And I don't want to like, you know, shame anyone because they'd probably be proud of it. But I I also feel like, well, the people in my family are not bad people. So I was kind of trying to also understand the way like the internet creates these kind of political divides that maybe aren't quite as stark as we believe. And how, like sometimes you have to deal with family members, close family members who who do have very strikingly different political beliefs. And Iris's parents are evangelical and Trump supporters and anti-abortion and you name it. And I was sort of interested, like as a novel, I'm always interested in empathizing. So I was sort of interested in empathizing with the family. Now, the parents definitely don't come across well. I think they're definitely the most like caricaturish of the characters. But I think if you read the book, you'll understand like I'm not trying to write a screed against Trump. But it just felt like if I didn't mention it, especially because like in the way that it's like affected my family, my husband's family, like I just felt like I would be doing a disservice.
On to lighter subjects. So you show us everything that's sort of screwed up and fucked up about the internet, but you also show us everything that is wonderful about the internet, like weird cat videos. My favorite thing, so Ira sort of like rewards herself at various points of the novel with like looking for weird things on the internet. And one of the things that I really related to, because I do this, was videos of weird animal friendships, like a baby giraffe being friends with a baby kitten or something. And then has anyone ever seen these videos? They're absolutely amazing. They're like so well produced. Like the music they play, you're like, oh my God, Buster and Snowflake. So what is, I have to believe that is based in real experience. What do you search for as a reward after like a long day of writing to cheer yourself up?
So I have to say, like most of the cute things I've just like come across accidentally. Like, I have friends who send me stuff, but I've definitely seen millions of those sort of animal friendship videos. The other one that like I saw for a while on Facebook, which like I have educated people about through the book, was the marshmallow or Shiba Inu, Labradoodle or fried chicken. I don't know if people have seen that, but it's just like classic historical, importance. But when I think when I like, as a reward, I like either put the phone down and just take a nap, or I just like, I scroll. I mean, I look at a little porn. I'm not gonna lie. That can be a reward.
I have, the algorithm, right? The almighty algorithm will like just, if you're like scrolling through Instagram.
If you hit the search button on Instagram, it understands you better than anyone. And mine is just like guys like flexing with shirts off and cats.
Yeah. Mine is like, this might be getting a little too gross, but like the other day, like I went to that and it was like, like dogs, guys flexing, and then a weird one, which was like ingrow and hair removal video. And I was like, what the click? And then anyway, I was like, this is gross. I will watch you pull that. Hey, but like, there is a whole community of people that are just watching things like that.
Yeah.
There are like millions of these things. I have no idea why it was fed to me. I'm sure now I'm just going to be fed. I watch way too many of them. Now I'm just going to be fed them all the time. Okay. So this is your second novel. Carnegie Hill obviously was, if you have not read Carnegie Hill, you must read Carnegie Hill. It's wonderful. What was different this time around in your process? And how are you different as a writer this time around?
So that's a great question. And it's a complicated answer, and I'll try to simplify it somewhat. I wrote Carnegie Hill like in the years after grad school. The novel I wrote in grad school like didn't really work, and I just kind of put it away. But I was just writing short stories about this like friend of mine and the people he knew in his co-op building. And I was growing really fast as a writer. Like I could feel myself like finally able to write things that I had wanted to write, which was the best feeling. I think it's like probably the fastest I've ever grown. And so I wrote all these short stories, and then I was like, okay, what do I have? And I showed it to my writing group, and they were like, you have a bunch of stories. And I was like, no, I wanted this to be a novel. So I like rewrote it a couple times, probably more times than anyone should rewrite anything. That process was like I was just kind of randomly writing about things that interested me and sort of trying to combine it. And then, trying to get the book deal was a whole thing, which I can tell people about another time. And then the second book was like, I was working on a different book, which I'm trying to finish now. But the second book was like, my editors were like, you should write this thing about weddings because we love the wedding in Carnegie Hill. And so I plotted it. I plotted the whole thing out, which was different from the previous one. And I wrote it. I wanted it to be, the Carnegie Hill was just this kind of this whole bunch of stuff happening. And I mean, I stand by that book. I love it, but it's just like looking into the private lives of a bunch of different people. I wanted the Bridesmaids Union to be like a bullet, like no distractions. So I made this plot and I wrote it out, and it was just as I had written, and then as I had planned. And then I showed it to people, and they were like, well, the editors were like, well, we'll buy it, but it's like a little cartoonish, a little too satirical. So I spent a lot of time on the sort of rewriting. I mean, I'm just like the king of rewriting. No one has done as much as I have. But I spent a lot of time trying to make it more of a human story, and in the process, I'll just say that I now have a different agent and a different editor, and there was a lot of stuff that happened that went down, and a pandemic happened, and but that was a different process. And then the process I'm working on now actually is different too. I'm trying to also write a sort of straightforward, direct novel, but also not plan so much. And that's a completely different experience.
Yeah. Well, that sort of touched on my second to last question, which is, what are you working on now? But do you
Sure, I'll talk about it more. I don't know if it'll be published. It's a little weird, but it's about this what some people would call family of creation. It's like a queer people coming together, living together, supporting each other. And I'm always interested in the ways that in what pulls us together also pushes us apart. So it's fraught relationships, but they all live together, and it's told over 30 years, starting at the end of the sort of in the early 90s when AIDS was still, epidemic, and ending in 2020 or 2021, I guess, when the vaccine comes, because I am interested in anti-vaxxers. And so this character, I see, it's two characters, one who is very much pro science, and one who refuses to, and bad things happen.
It's a novel. My last question for you, which I give you a little forewarning for, so you have your answers. 2 books that you would recommend, and 1 book you wish you had written.
Okay, I did think about this. One that I'm always recommending to everyone, because I just it was a transformative experience to read, was Cleanness by Garth Greenwell. I just I reread those stories all the time. I sign them to my students. I haven't yet met anyone who doesn't love that collection. It's just I feel everything he writes, it feels like it's already been written 1,000 years. It feels like you're just reading something that already existed, that didn't have to be written, because it just is there. Another book that I use a lot in terms of thinking about fiction is the Portrait of a Lady. The Portrait. I don't know the title, but it's a good book. Henry James. I feel like that, the sort of, would that be considered early James? Like his like plots are so perfect. And that book in particular, I'm always thinking about the moment between Madame Merle and the bad husband guy, whatever his name is, where they sort of like give a glance to each other, and it's how Isabel Archer knows that she's been like set up. And it's like I think about that all the time, and I don't know how much it ends up in my fiction, but I'm like always like trying to get something like that to work. Oh, and the book I wish I'd written, well, a book that I like that felt like I actually had written it, which is like, it sounds like an obnoxious thing to say, but when I was reading Mrs. Fletcher by Tom Perrotta, I was like, wait, did I write this? Because it like so mirrors exactly the things I'm interested in. And like, actually he writes sentences in the exact same way.
Huh.
Now, I'm not saying I'm as good as he is, but I did feel like, oh wait, I kind of, yeah, maybe I did write this and forgot.
You should sue it.
Yeah, totally.
Well, thank you so much.
I think we have some time if anybody in the audience has questions.
No. I'm very I did my MFA at NYU. I had a lovely experience. I learned a lot. I've also had to unlearn a lot. I don't know what your experience was, but I met great people. I got to study with wonderful writers. And like I said, I think it did ultimately improve my writing. I think that there, at least when I was getting an MFA, there was like a very, very specific aesthetic that we were sort of being trained in. And I thought I was supposed to be writing a certain kind of book that I spent the 2 years of my MFA writing, and then the 2 years after writing and then not selling. And then while I was deciding what to do with that book, I wrote The People We Hate at the Wedding, because I was like, fuck it, I just want to write something that I want to write and that sounds like me and isn't in this sort of, I don't know, focused on the way that like light is reflecting off the underside of a wrist. And then I said, then I kind of.
But you already had books out when you got your MFA, right?
I had one out when I got my MFA.
So,
but that book should have never.
oh,
No. I mean, I wrote it when I was 24, which like no one should write. What is a 24-year-old?
I had a I guess somewhat more positive experience with the MFA. I had been sort of spinning my wheels for like a decade after college, just like writing book after book that went nowhere, and I didn't know how to do anything with. And I just like, so in 2008, I got laid off. The housing crisis sort of ended. Well, whatever. Anyway, I was jobless. And my friend was like, why don't you get an MFA? You like are a fiction writer. You could, whatever. And it was great for me. Just because like I finally like learned the things that maybe I could have read in books or whatever. I just, for some reason, those lessons never got to me. And it's just like, it was just like a total level up. I'm always repeating things that my professors told me. And it also like helped me get my first agent. So like, it was really good. Like, I don't think it's for everyone. And I don't think you don't necessarily have to go to like a fancy one. I just think it's good to have time to kind of grow in that way. And getting to the point of publishing a book is so hard, and so like it just takes so much personal growth, but also so much persistence that it just helps to like be in a community that can, or that can sort of support you in that.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I can't promise it'll get published, but I can walk you through some of the writing.
I do agree with there's something really magical about being in a community of writers for 2 years. And mine was yours 2 years? Yeah, for 2 years. And and kind of giving yourself the space to say, I'm focusing on my craft for 2 years, and that's what I'm doing. I think that there's something very magical about that and transformative about that. And I do agree with Jonathan that it, like, just kind of not to be crude, but it does help you meet people that know people to like get an agent, right? Like it helps you to navigate the publishing world in a way that I think can be helpful.
Some authors aren't very comfortable in their work as described as satire. They feel like if a reader thinks something is satire, that the characters aren't real. It's just sort of this, I'm only writing it to make fun of something, etc. And yet, I'm super interested in it too. In my own writing, that both of your work, that skittering satire, so the New York Times, and what you described, Jonathan, as like at first it was cartoonish and you had to pull back. How do you navigate writing something where you clearly, both of through the reading, it really came through like hilarious stuff. How do you navigate writing stuff that is really funny, but feels real, but is like maybe poking at society without being ridiculous and without feeling like, I don't know, you're just sort of making fun of things that are easy to make fun of?
Oh, we should repeat the question for the Zoom.
So the question was essentially like, how do you write satire and humor while making sure that it isn't cartoon? Let me know if this is okay, without making it cartoonish. And I think my answer to that is like, the funny satire stuff that's like the bells and whistles, right? That ultimately the story has to be about people, and about the struggles that those people are facing, and about the relationship between those people. And so if that isn't there and that heart isn't there, then the satire is going to seem cartoonish and it won't land. Or alternatively, it'll seem cruel, right? Like jokes seem cruel when you, the writer, stop caring about your characters. And so I think that for it to land and for it to work, it almost has to be an afterthought, and the real energy has to be put into the creating vivid, real, complicated people.
I approve this message. Yeah, Jar.
I thought Kyle was problematic character. I really had trouble. Comment on.
Okay, so yeah, the question was that Kyle in my book is problematic. He's a gay guy who joins the bridesmaids union because his lover, he's in love with, is going to marry someone else, and and the lover asked him to be a groomsman, and he's posting all this stuff, and it becomes less and less clear that he's telling the truth. And it also becomes more and more sort of shocking and like not appropriate for like a community of bridesmaids support group thing. And so I'm curious to know more about what you want me to comment on, but yeah, he's definitely not like a model gay guy. I felt like because I'm gay, I have some leeway in making like I don't think any of the characters are villainous, but I have some leeway in making like not nice gay people. So he is really great and generous in a lot of ways. He's an influencer, and I was just kind of interested in like the ways that like all that adoration can kind of get to someone's head and can like change them. And he's also a refugee, and like what saved him was money and fame. So like it's this kind of perfect storm of creating a narcissist. And I was just interested in like what happens, like how can that be kind of a grenade for this story? Yeah, he definitely he's not, it keeps veering darker and darker, and And that's kind of what ended up happening. Yeah, and like I think Library Journal was like, just note that this book might not be what you're expecting.
Well, like gay people are allowed to be villains.
Yeah, I mean, he's not a villain like Scar in The Lion King. He's like a human who, like, yeah, he's like, I don't know, he felt real to me. Yeah.
How do you go about doing the plot? I've heard that some people write characters or plot about their character, and do you use 3x5 cards that you just come straight out?
Okay, so the question is, how do we do the plot? And do you want to take that? No. Okay. So as I was saying, like it's different every time, and like part of the fun of writing fiction is you get to kind of try something. I think the Bridesmaids Union, I think like I love the book. I definitely like plotted it too much. I was interested in like seeing what happened. Like I had this idea for what would happen in the end, and like I had like all the things like sort of I had everything plotted out, but plot really has to come from the characters. It has to be really, I think it's safe to say that plot is character motivation. So you can't just come up with a bunch of stuff because the characters haven't even been created yet. And then so then they get on the page and do their stuff, like it does, you wouldn't believe it, that like it'll just feel like the author is pushing the book forward. And so like I was able to get those kinks out, but that took years of rewriting. I rewrote every sentence. I mean, actually probably multiple times, but so I think like I don't know if there's a best way to do it. Like the one I'm working on now, as I said, I had this sort of vision for like some conflicts and a final moment that I'm sort of interested in writing toward, but the writing process has been much more organic. I've just been like letting things happen. I honestly don't know if it's working because I mean, I've showed it to some people and some people have liked it, but the proof is when, you know, the agent gets it, the editors get it. I don't know. Do you have other thoughts about like how to plot?
I don't. Well, I don't know. Maybe. I typically need. I'm kind of like you, what you were just describing with the book. Let's Not Do That Again was pretty heavily plotted beforehand, but that's only because there were like elements that had to come together in it, and so like point A was going to affect point M, and I knew that, and so there had to be things sort of allowing that to happen along the way. So in that sense, it was more like putting together a puzzle. The book that I'm working on now is much more what Jonathan was describing, which is sort of like a series of moments that are working towards a major conflict and then a major kind of denouement. And kind of what happens and how I get to those moments is totally reliant on the characters and the characters' interactions. And so I'm having to sort of shift gears, which has been proving to be very difficult, from Let's Not Do That Again, and being like, it's okay if I don't know what's going to exactly happen in the scene. Let me just feel it out and kind of decide when the scene is going to naturally close. Then I'll move on to the next scene, right? And so, but to your point, I think that every book that you're writing on is obviously going to be a different book, and thus necessitates a different process.
I think I would just say that like try to have your characters like react to things and actually follow through with their reactions. Because like that moves the book, is action and reaction. And if the characters do something that's not related to what just came before, like it just doesn't feel like it's not it's I think John Gardner called it profluent. I don't even know what that means, but it doesn't flow in the same way. I think we have time for one more question.
That kind of follows on the thought question, but I think you can work backwards at all, like with some, or if there's some fluidity in how you're working when you're writing, or no?
So the question was, can we work backwards and kind of asynchronously, right?
Right, like if you have an idea of where you like things and then, maybe you don't do that.
So
Or there's a piece that you need to kind of.
So I really wish I was the sort of writer that could just be like, I know that this scene is going to take place sometime near the end of the book, but I really want to write it because it's calling to me. So I'm going to write that scene right now. Like, I know writers who do that. And I'm just like, oh, like, what a dream that must be. When I try to do that, I'm like such a control freak that I start panicking. And I'm like, well, the foot bone is connected to the ankle bone, which is connected to the shin bone, so I'm going to start there. But then build the body, right? But I know, I think I imagine it's sort of just based on one's own personal process. And for me, I have a hard time doing that because I'm like, but I don't quite know who the characters are going to be by then. And so if I write that scene, I might ultimately have to go and change that scene because by the time that I get there in the rest of the book, the characters might have grown into different people. So that's my fear always.
Yeah, I've never done that.
Do you know people do?
I know people who
Yeah.
do. I totally do. I can't.
I can't.
I do rewrite the first chapter when I'm done. Have you do
yeah,
that?
Yeah.
And then I rewrite the ending 4 times.
Right.
Because I never know if they should marry the guy or not.
Right. Who knows?
Okay, thank you all. Thanks everyone for coming. And thanks to the Hudson Valley Writers Center. You're so amazing.
Sure. Yeah, go buy them.
And everyone online sign copies of the books available at the village bookstore.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I have one from the Strand, but
I needed that for that.
Oh, thank you. Nice to meet you. Thank you.